And I would like to welcome in particular Nathan Law, who is going to be my partner for the next couple of minutes in our conversation. Nathan, you were the youngest LegCo member, the youngest member of the Legislative Council in Hong Kong in 2016 and left office the year after. Today, you're one of the few internationally audible voices remaining from the democratic camp in Hong Kong. Let me pose a very generic question first. We've heard news today that in Hong Kong, public demonstrations are not allowed on the occasion of the 1st of July, just as they had been oppressed for the 4th of June. We hear a lot of negative developments like the closing of Apple Daily, the fact that there are no Democrats remaining in LegCo in the Legislative Assembly. Give us your take of how the situation is today in Hong Kong, and in particular for the activists of the democracy movement, please.
Thank you so much, Reinhard, for your introduction and inviting me to this seminar. I think it's important for us to continue to be able to speak to the international audience about what is going on in Hong Kong. After imposition of the national security law for a year, I think we all can easily observe what has changed in Hong Kong. The one country, two system after 1997, which is governing Hong Kong's governance, for now, it looks like it's moving towards much closer to one country, one system after the implementation of the national security law. We used to believe that this one country, two system is a firewall in between the Chinese Communist Party and Hong Kong people. But for now, the firewall is torn down. The way that the Chinese government think about governing mainland China is totalitarianism, which means that concentration of power and also erase all checks and balances in the society is gradually transplanting into Hong Kong. So we have been seeing journalists being arrested, media companies that are critical are forced to close, activists are being jailed, education is being turned to a brainwashing one, teaching students to love the country, but in fact love the Chinese Communist Party, etc. So we can see a complete transformation of Hong Kong's politics. And as you said, rallies are being banned. 4th of June and 1st of July rallies, which are two most populated protesters in Hong Kong, are no longer existing. And in general, people who dare to speak differently, to be critical towards the government, are forced to become silent. So I think this is exactly what is happening in Hong Kong. Our one country, two system is gone, and the promises the Beijing government made to us, democracy, rule of law, autonomy, and eventual democracy, are not kept.
Nathan, I recall that when the so-called national security law was being passed, Beijing propaganda announced that this would only strike against a very small number of what they called extremists or terrorists. We could have been warned by the fact that they labeled the whole democratic movement as terrorist. But today we see that this is gaining an expansive importance. So are there any sectors in Hong Kong political and social life that are not impacted by the national security law? What about the education system? What about the public service?
I believe the impact of the national security law is overwhelming and all-rounded, not only for democratic campaigners who merely participated in primary election and they see it as a subversive action, so dozens of them are being arrested. But for in education sector, students who talks about, for example, 4th of June massacre, the 89 democratic movement in mainland China, they are being reported by their colleagues and fellows, and they are forced to stop teaching. And you can see there is a restructuring of the curriculum that it introduced a lot of teaching materials about praising the Chinese Communist Party. I think this is a following effect of the implementation of the national security law, because I think the law is a weaponized legal weapon for the government to prosecute individuals that they target. But it also brings along a complete overhaul of political philosophy, which they consider those critical voices are subversive, that they are not allowing the idea of division of power existing in Hong Kong, so that we grow up learning about Hong Kong system as a division of power. But for now, the Beijing government says that it's all gone, it's not existing, and it's dominated by the Chinese and by the Hong Kong government.
The battle in Hong Kong has long been over universal suffrage. But what we've seen from the latest change in the election law, developments go in the opposite direction. The number of members of LegCo that would even be elected is shrinking. And there are new provisions that would probably prevent a person like yourself, if you were still in Hong Kong, from even standing as a candidate. So what's going to be the relevancy of the political institutions in Hong Kong? Is this still going to be a relevant factor, or should we expect Hong Kong to be basically run from Beijing through emissaries? Is it going to be turned into a Chinese mainland city just like any other, or are there plans to keep some special arrangements for Hong Kong? What do you think?
I think Hong Kong is turning to just an ordinary Chinese city, just by checking the election overhaul that they imposed a couple of months ago. For now, basically, there is no meaningful participation from the pro-democracy camp inside the political system. If you're going to run for legislative council, you have to be vetted by political police, and you have to gain the support of an election committee, which majority of them are from appointees of Beijing. Is it quite impossible for you to be independently minded and also going into election in Hong Kong? So you could see inside the system, there's no room for pro-democracy candidates, and all of them are basically listening directly to Beijing. And if we observe the latest development in Hong Kong, Zhang Li became the chief secretary, who is from the police force. And it really signaling that the police force is actually rising to the top of the whole bureaucracy, and people claim it as a police state. And I think that is an accurate description, because it's obvious that since the implementation of the national security law, the national security agency in Hong Kong becomes the center of the politics, and it has overarching power over all of the other branches of the government. And seemingly, the National Security Bureau has the ultimate power to decide what to do in Hong Kong. And I think that is a worrying trend, because we will only see more and more this kind of like security power lying on the hands of them, and Hong Kong become more and more like a police state.
Nathan, as Beijing is dismantling the freedoms that were once guaranteed to Hong Kongers through the Sino-British Joint Declaration and then the Basic Law, Xi Jinping still insists on upholding, as he says, the principle of one country, two systems. He just said so today in the big centenary celebration that China will continue to uphold the principle. I mean, it's so obviously at odds with reality. Why do they say this?
Beijing has always tried to preserve an outlook of them adhering international order, adhering to promises, and falsifying their image as a peacemaker and a good partner of all parts of the world. But in fact, they are not. They are disguising themselves. It's so obvious that the one country, two system, as Xi Jinping defines now, is completely different from the one which was proposed. Just take back to the 80s when the one country system was proposed. The historical context was Hong Kong people were anxious about being governed by Communist Party, and then the emergence of 4th of June massacre, making Hong Kong people immigrate to elsewhere, to Canada, to the UK, and to every parts of the world. And in order to appease Hong Kong people, the one country, two system framework emerged and tried to convince Hong Kong people that our lives will not change, even though we are governed by different countries. So that is the initial purpose of the one country, two system. And when you look back, its core essence is to preserve Hong Kong's freedom, autonomy, and democracy. But for now, in the way that Xi Jinping says that, the one country, two system is actually basically following the idea of one country. It is not a guarantee for Hong Kong people's freedom, but is actually a framework for the Chinese government to do whatever they want. And that is definitely not what one country, two system means. So that we could really see promises are not kept. The Chinese Communist Party has been lying about it, and they try to falsify themselves as a hero to what they've promised, but in fact, they're just liars.
Nathan, the judiciary, based on the English common law tradition, has been one of the bulwarks of the freedoms that Hong Kong used to enjoy. We've heard public utterances from pro-Beijing forces saying that the judiciary should change track. To what degree would you say can the judiciary at this point still be considered bulwark in defending individuals, or is that vanishing too?
I think the judicial system in Hong Kong is definitely compromised under the national security law. First of all, the prosecution is completely biased. It is a government body. It always prosecute activists, protesters with the most serious charges that they can find. And the government and the police act with impunity. There have not been any charges put against police with their misbehaviors in the past 2 years, which we have seen ample evidence of their misuse of force or mistreating protesters. And on the other hand, the courts, I think that with the emergence of the national security law, the courts cannot be impartial or stand aside or as we think that they will uphold the rule of law, because I think under the restriction of the national security law, they just can't do it. For example, take the case of the primary election as an example. For them, a lot of them are being locked in jail for months already before they can appear to the court to start an official trial, because when they apply for bail, there is no presumption of innocence. The bail term of the national security law is that you have to prove to the court that you are innocent and you won't commit in other national security offense in the future. So that once the government press arrest on you and they can arbitrarily do it, and the court says that we don't believe that you stop speaking political terms, they can throw you in jail basically until the next trial, and it could be months and it could be years. And we take the Apple Daily as an example. The Apple Daily, its parent company, LegCo, is forced to close its operation in a matter of days First, they raided the Apple Daily office with more than 500 police, and the companies are charged, executives are arrested, and their assets are frozen so that they cannot pay their staffers. And banks, they cannot serve the company, otherwise they will also be charged with the national security law. So the whole listed company is forced to close in a matter of days without given a chance to defend on the courts. They didn't even appear on court to defend themselves. So I think this is also a serious breach on the rule of law, which there is no procedural justice. Whenever the government says that you are guilty and a listed company is forced to close, and there's nothing that they could do. So I think this is definitely a demise of Hong Kong's rule of law. I don't believe in Hong Kong rule of law anymore. And any like protest related cases will be weighted extremely heavily on the government side.
I also heard from a former colleague of yours, and I won't name the person, that the present situation with the judiciary is basically combining the worst of two worlds. On one hand, denying bail, and then on the other hand, using the common law tradition to delay the court cases, leads to a situation where you may be in jail for 2 years before even seeing a judge. So I think that's really a very bad development. Look, let me ask you another question about the reactions or the role that international businesses have been playing in Hong Kong ever since the extradition law originally was proposed in early 2019. What would you say about their attitude, about the role they play? HSBC has been a very prominent example, but there might also be others. So give us an idea of how that plays out, please.
Well, for now, as we see how the economic situation in Hong Kong changes, is heavily relying on China business instead of international business. So whenever big business have access to mainland China, well, basically their lifeline is being threatened if they do not obey what China says, because China will use its economic operation to blackmail them, to intimidate them, to coerce them, unless they cooperate. Otherwise, they cannot operate in Hong Kong and in mainland China. So under that big backdrop, we could see a lot of big business have signed petitions in support of the national security law, and also refuse to cooperate with pro-democracy institutions or individuals. And I think this plays out like they are one of the colluders of the Chinese Communist Party. I think these actions should be called out. And I think countries not only have to call out these actions, they also need to provide assistance to this company to counter the intimidation of the Chinese government and the forced coercion from them. So I think it's important that we develop mechanism on the one hand to make sure that this company are not assisting the governments to conduct suppression. But on the other hand, when they want to resist the Chinese government's influence, they have some resources that they can rely on. So I think this is a really pending discussion in all around the world, because as long as we omit the fact that these big companies also like suffering from pressure, we are unable to solve the problem. So for me, it's weird to continue to see that business still have no awareness of what's happening in Hong Kong and continue to do business here, especially for those who have some caution about how the legal system in mainland China. I think the Apple Daily is a perfect example. It is a listed company, and it could be forced to close in a matter of days because they have certain speeches or actions that the government doesn't like. And I think it demonstrates how Beijing can manipulate Hong Kong's legal system to achieve its political aim. And we all thought that, oh, the red line stops here. We all thought that, oh, it's just Apple Daily, it's just a big business, it's just Jimmy Lai. But I think if you observe the development of the national security law, it doesn't really limit only to democratic campaigners. It will extend to protester, and eventually it will extend to household, it will extend to teacher, it extends to journalists. And I think once the Chinese Communist Party like experienced the way that the national security law could work in Hong Kong, and how they can use these legal means to force at least the company to close in a matter of days, they will definitely abuse that and apply to more companies with different reasons. So I think that is actually with a risk for you to do business here if you are to remain certain degree of freedom and rights to speak up for yourself and for your brand. So I think these threats is often omitted or neglected because of how tempting the China market is. But I think we should really take it very seriously.
Nathan, there's two questions to you from the Q&A, and I'll read them to you because they will be of interest also to other participants of the dialogue. One says, how can I, as an individual, support Hong Kong and activists like you or Agnes Chow, besides spreading awareness of the issues? And the second question is also, how freely can you still use your social media's messenger in Hong Kong? Is it still possible to keep normal contacts with people in Hong Kong?
Well, thank you for the question. I think first and foremost, we need to create some changes in terms of how our politics sees China and how our politics sees freedom itself. We need to mobilize people to encourage the government to put an assertive China policy as their priority, to put human rights violation around the world as something that they have to tackle coordinately. And by doing so, we can really lessen the pressure that the Hong Kong citizens are facing. This is on a general term in how we can force government's change in order to help the protest in Hong Kong. But of course, paying attention to individuals, promoting awareness raising work, attending events like that is important. We're stepping into another phase that we need to deepen the understanding of Hong Kong and Hong Kong's protest in the societies. And with the help of you, we can definitely do it better. So I think these are also important initiatives to be accomplishing. And in regards to the second question, I think for me, I still use social media, Facebook, Instagram every day, and I can reach to the Hong Kong people, but just don't know how long that I could do it in the future. If you ask any Hong Kong people whether they are worried that social media will be closed, the internet firewall from mainland China will extend to Hong Kong, they will definitely say yes. It's a huge worry in Hong Kong, especially we've seen websites of for example, the initiative that I was part of it, the Hong Kong Charter, which it outlines our belief and our demands. The website of it is blocked in Hong Kong, so that you can only use VPN to visit the website. And if you are using Hong Kong service, you cannot visit those websites. There are precedents of it now. And I think if the situation in Hong Kong gets worse, there is a possibility that these international social media are blocked also. So I think that remains an uncertainty in the future.
One more question comes in, and I'll read it to you. Are Hong Kong democracy activists living in exile being threatened or bullied through coordinated governmental efforts by Beijing or Hong Kong authorities, as is the case with Uyghur activists?
Well, yes, definitely. We all understand how far-reaching China's reach could be, and we don't feel completely safe, even though we are in a democratic country. We've been seeing a lot of activities from mainland China and also a lot of United Front organizations in the UK, in the US, and they are still operating under the spotlight. So for us, it's never easy to live in exile, and I've been hearing about cases of like following, intimidation, or even physical assault. So it happens, and it keeps us worried, and we just have to live our life in a very vigilant way. So I think these are something that we should really be aware of.
One last question from my side, Nathan. There was a slogan in the democracy movement saying, "Be like water." Now, thinking back to the developments over the last 2 years, would you say there should or could have been a turn taken in a different direction? And what does being like water mean today for the people in Hong Kong?
Well, I think be water means that we just have to be fluid, we be flexible in terms of our strategy, in terms of how we organize ourselves, and adopt different tactics when we face different situations. So I think the protest is a demonstration of be water, because we are formless, we don't have a hierarchy, we kind of like organize protests in a direct democracy way. So it also actually comes with your questions about whether we can have another turn. I believe this is definitely a hypothetical question and can never be answered, because all of our actions are public initiated. We don't have a leadership to tell what people should do, and they act with public wisdom. So I think it's difficult to say that in that gesture, oh, we should have done that, we should have done that. But I think, well, at the end of the day, Hong Kong people demonstrate bravery and extreme, actually, resilience. And if you could look at the very beginning of the protest, we've got 2 million people, completely peaceful. We have tried our best to protest and to demonstrate our willful demands with the most restrained manner. Things developed later on had been quite unfortunate, but that is also the responsibility of the government. I don't think we should blame any protesters for the development we have now. It's definitely the government's fault by refusing to comply with their promises and to demise and to dismiss Hong Kong people's demands. So I think for now, be water means that, for example, I am already in an exile life. I cannot go back to Hong Kong. Once I step foot in Hong Kong, I will be submitted to decades of imprisonment. I just have to play my role to continue to be the voice of Hong Kong and to engage with the community that we have here, and to continue to broadcast Hong Kong people's movement, our voices. I'm not a protester now. I'm an advocate. I'm an ambassador, and that is my new role. And I just have to accommodate it, because I believe that is the best for our movement and for our cause.
Thank you so very much, Nathan, for this conversation and all the insights that you shared with us, and also the sense of obstinate engagement and the promise of keeping up the fight. There are more questions in the Q&A, but they will be picked up by the next round of conversation between Catherine Göring-Eckardt and Miko Huatari. So thank you again, and I'll cede the ground to Catherine.
Thank you so much, Bernhard.